Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Man at YouTube with another model build. Today we'll be looking at the high grade Iron Blooded Orphans Hyakuri. It's a very interesting grunt space unit with a ridiculously oversized backpack shoulder thing. I've chosen this model for the Gunpla Builders Australia Weathering Challenge, a bit of a competition they have in that community and forum, a few set rules. This was mostly built out of the box with a few modifications. We'll get all into that very quickly. These new Iron Blooded Orphan kits are lovely, as we saw with the Barbatos model. Get a bit of an inner frame and all the outer bits of armor just snaps into place. Cracking open the box from a snapper's point of view, lovely illustrated instructions starting to head in the realm of English as well as Japanese, especially for paint and instructional. We have 7 runners including polar caps, a couple of clear stand bits. Very small parts number, but the color separation as well as the parts counts and articulation is quite lovely. The instructions are very firm and easy. Going straight into the build, we are greeted with an inner frame. Some of it is exposed, so painting is ideal. Seam lines is not too much of a problem. Some of them have been filled, but the most prominent ones, bit of detail has been raised and the seam lines has been chamfered into a panel line. Chamfering is quite easy. I just filed down both edges of the seam line until we get a bit of a V groove and it looks almost like a tank like armor join. The piece at the very top sort of just blended in, and this was raised up with cut out styrene or pla plate. For the lower shin guard, it had pegs that would fit in the hole of the inner frame. And these pegs were cut, but cut just short enough that they would have tension to snap onto those hole areas. This led me to be able to glue them together, run a bit of super glue down, fill it and sand back. Other armor where they showed an indent for a hole, the hole was drilled out to show off a bit of the inner frame colour, which will be painted in gunmetal. These small modifications pretty much handled the majority of the issues of the lower legs and legs. The upper body and torso were very nicely proportioned and designed. Really loved them. Did very little to improve them or whatnot, including the gun and the shield, which do attach and remove from the backpack. Was not too keen on that really big thruster backpack, so that was cut off with an ultrasonic knife, and where there would have been a hole or whatnot filled with sculpting putty, sanded back and neatened until it looked like that belonged. I'll be calling this a ground type mobile suit opposed to a space one. With this change, it resembles more of a Gasaraki or an older 90s generic mech. Being a small kit, all the pieces were proportioned in colours they're going to be painted. A lot of the outer armour was textured using Tamiya basic type putty to give it a bit of a cast effect, and a little bit of Tamiya texture paint dry brushed. I probably should have used a finer texture paint, but pretty much drove the message home. The inner frame was airbrushed gunmetal and then shaded with darker and lighter silvers and tarnished a bit with a clear brown. The thrusters and other areas had a mix of darker metallics, coppers, golds and whatnot to give it a very fancy warm thruster look. A lot of fun. Each set of armor was applied with an undercoat in lacquer, allowed to fully dry and cure. A bit of hairspray via brush applied to it and acrylic paint painted on top. Before the acrylic paint, which had a little bit of retardant, the corners and other areas would be paint chipped with a toothpick. This created very interesting edging and a slightly realistic paint chipping effect. Another piece had the same deal except with enamel, and I did some weathering using washers and had the paint wear away. One small proportion was also salt weathered. The undercoat and the top coat were very similar to make it very subtle. Once finished and dried, everything was applied with a matte coat, given a sludge wash in multiple colours, and the heavy armour would have a mixture of MIG production pigment and a setter, and created rain streaks or drops in thin rust colour. All of that was rounded off with SMS clear matte. The next step was a bit of a diorama base to tell a bit of a story. I found this very interesting clear stackable container from Daiso and masked the very bottom to make it look like it's a floating base for shits and giggles. It was primed in Mr. Color 1500 black primer and given a bit of a texture or elevated earth effect with 2-part epoxy putty milliput. Bit of texture stand, a bit of airbrushing, and a lot of static grass and loose leaf application with quite a bit of PVA glue. Once that completely dried, a little further airbrushing to darken the edges with black. The static grass stiffened with hairspray, and then the colour uniformed a bit more with a very light brown and yellow to look almost like a wheat field. This led to a fairly interesting and uniformed base. Don't ever be afraid to airbrush and paint your flock. I've done quite a few way over the top, very heavy weathering and chipping and whatnot space mobile suits for a lot of fun and giving it that bit of a more comic book look. This time just honing back and looking at some military kits and whatnot, I wanted to go to a more acceptable yet still very dark finish, and pretty much achieved this for the challenge. The idea of using the hairspray between the paint and chipping the paint back while it's still wet with a toothpick was an idea borrowed by Mr. Kawaguchi when he did a demonstration in the Australian Gunpla Builders World Cup. I had to fill in some of the gaps because I didn't understand what sort of paints he would use and how he would chip it without chipping back to plastic or primer. This is the conclusion I've come to using a mix of paint types and drying times. I would like to have a bit more of a contrast between the rust and the colours, but when you look at it in person and whatnot, it is a bit more obvious. But I feel that the weathering is subtle enough. It's probably realistic rust streaks or paint chips that would appear on something that's over 20 meters tall and would fight to be utilized in both space or ground conflict. There is a lot of controversy of late and debate that can the Gundam alloy or Gundams rust or not. I believe there's enough multi-material and metals in one of these machines that there could at least be streaking of rust from the internals or fluids. This debate doesn't really matter, but if it looks good, the modeler should be quite pleased to put it on display. I am very happy how this turned out and would like to do something like this again very soon, but more of a contrast of the undercolor and the top coats or paint scheme. Maybe not brown on brown, but proper color on brown. We will see how that goes. That all set aside, thank you very much for watching. As always, until next time, stay tuned for further content, videos once or twice a week posted, as well as further content uploaded to the Makona Man on Facebook, work in progresses, other links and interesting tutorials as well as resources. If you leave a comment in a form of a question, I'll be more than happy to answer it, and we'll talk and catch you guys next time. Stay tuned for more.